presentation PowerPoint. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. And it's so great to be here. I really enjoyed the previous presentation. It was so uplifting to me. And so I hope in some way, this is the traditional lecture format, but I do hope in some way you can take away something from my presentation as well. Let me present. Okay. So again, my emphasis today is on corporal punishment and an alternative for it, which is school-based family counseling. And it's primarily focused on Caribbean immigrants. And so I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, which is an island off the coast of South America in the Caribbean. And so my presentation outline, first, I just wanted to highlight the status of corporal punishment in the world, and then give an overview of just the practice and its unintended outcomes. I'm not here to debate corporal punishment and whether or not it should be used or not be used. That's another presentation in and of itself, and not for today. But once we cover that, I'm just going to briefly, really briefly, just highlight SPFC and conjoined family counseling, because those are the basis for the work that we did with our student, Justin, which is a pseudonym. It's not the real name of the client. And then once we cover that, we're just going to talk about some multicultural considerations. So we have 30 minutes or a little bit less than that at this point to go over that material. So corporal punishment worldwide. If you have ever done any research in the area of corporal punishment, you may or may not be surprised at the current status of corporal punishment and how lawful it is in certain countries. So worldwide, there are 33 countries that have prohibited the use of corporal punishment with children. So outright, they have banned it. And then there are 25 more that have already initiated legal reform in that area. So at some, they probably have it in some way or format, maybe legally banned it in certain areas, maybe in the home or in the school or both. So that's the status, but most of the countries in the world obviously still have corporal punishment as being very legal in the home and possibly in the schools. In the United States, where I'm currently based, corporal punishment is still legal in the home in all 50 states in the US. And I think people are often surprised to hear that, especially in a state such as California, where it's very progressive. They're like, oh no, I thought that was banned. So why does Child Protective Services, get involved? But it's still legal. They're just various not instructions per se, but guidelines that you need to follow if you are going to use it. And then it's legal in the school in 19 states. And if I had a map, I usually, when I give just an overview of this, I usually have a map that I show where those states are located. And it's typically in the southern states, the southern parts of the US. And then in the Caribbean, corporal punishment is legal in the home in all 32 member states. So it's still legal there. And then it's legal in the school in all 29 member states. So teachers can opt to use corporal punishment with children at any point in time. But I would say in countries such as my country, Trinidad and Tobago, it's highly frowned upon. And then the Ministry of Education there have implemented guidelines. So teachers actually cannot use it. So although the country still has laws protecting that practice in the schools, the teachers and principals cannot use it because of the Ministry of Education's guidelines. And then over 70% of children ages 2 to 14 years in the Caribbean are subjected to corporal punishment. So that's a huge number and very important consider in the work that I'm presenting today. So why is corporal punishment so widespread? Why is its use so widespread? Because it has a huge cultural underpinning. It has been passed on from generation to generation, not only in the Caribbean, but worldwide. It's a go-to discipline method in many, many cultures. The values and beliefs regarding the practice is widely held by various populations. And so it's hard when it's been passed on generations to generations to really stand up against a potentially harmful practice, right? The religious support for it, there is scripture in the Bible that is often used to support the use of corporal punishment with children. He that spared the rod hated his child. And I take this to mean we must discipline our children. And so that doesn't necessarily mean by corporal punishment, but discipline. And so it's taken quite literally by many that we need to use a physical rod to discipline you. Otherwise, we're not doing our job as parents. And so when you're looking at it from that standpoint, it's really hard to get away from the use of corporal punishment. So that's really important and really understand in the Caribbean context. It's culturally supported, religiously supported as well. And so some of the unintended outcomes of corporal punishment, one of the things, I'm a parent of 3 kids, 6 and under. And so I know when my kids become a little bit rowdy, I usually wanted to work really fast. And I don't use corporal punishment with them, but I usually look for something, oh my gosh, like I just need to get them settled and behaved. And so a lot of times corporal punishment is attractive because it results in immediate change in behavior, right? And if you want to try to listen and they're not listening and you use that, obviously, most times, the typical child will stop doing what they're doing. However, that behavior change is not long lasting. And corporal punishment suffers from the same consequences that as other punishment-based measures. That is that the child, you get a child to stop doing the behavior, but they do not necessarily learn an alternative behavior, appropriate behavior for gaining their wants or needs. And as well, with that, along the lines of that, is that they're more likely to engage in the same behavior, just not in front of you or in front of the person that's likely to punish them. So those are some concerns with corporal punishment being used, as well as parents who use, the research shows that parents who use or engage in spanking are more likely to engage in physical punishment consistent with physical abuse. So there's this whole debate that talks about whether or not corporal punishment and physical abuse exist on the same continuum, if it's the same. There's a whole literature on that. And so it's very consistent in many ways that parents who use spanking, especially when they're angry, are more likely to physically harm their children. So the likelihood goes up. And then corporal punishment has been linked to internalizing and externalizing disorders. We're talking about low self-esteem. We're talking about depression, anxiety. We're talking about externalizing disorders such as bullying, aggression. We're talking about antisocial behavior, those type of things. So it can also, and to me, this is one of the major things with corporal punishment, is that it can disrupt the parent-child relationship. So that practice in and of itself can cause children to have more negative feelings about their parents and over time have less interaction with them. I was subjected to corporal punishment as a child. And I remember that experience. I didn't want to talk to my parents for days sometimes as I get older after I experienced that. And so the literature actually backs up that experience. And then parents who use corporal punishment are more likely to provide less security and autonomy. Of course, I would say that when you read the literature, that a lot of times harsh use of corporal punishment and the context in which you deliver corporal punishment do change some of the relationships and associations here. But even when you take that out, if you take a parent of warmth, for instance, a parent being loving while delivering corporal punishment, I'm not sure if that's really possible, but the link between corporal punishment and negative outcomes still continues to exist. So even when they're attempting to be really, gentle about it and helpful about it, it's still a concern. So when I work with parents who use corporal punishment, I'm always gently trying to give alternatives, right? I try not to talk down on them, because obviously that method, the cultural aspect of it, is really important. And then some of these parents just don't know anything other than what they currently use, right? And so school-based family counseling is just one tool that you can use to really help drive the learning process for alternative behaviors or methods for changing behavior, so for behavioral infractions. And so I'm preaching to the choir here, so I'm not going to go over this slide in too much detail, but I would say that school-based family counseling, I'm a school psychologist, and we're trained to do individual counseling, right? Because of my doctoral training, I do have training in family counseling, and that's how I was able to engage in that practice. But most school psychologists, right, they're not trained to do family counseling, and that's a drawback with our field. But given if they have the basic training in just family systems and just understanding the processes by which family works, a school psychologist, a school counselor, a clinical social worker can all engage in meeting the needs of the family within the school context. Oftentimes we treat the child in a vacuum, and we think that we can do something in this one room with a child and that they can be fixed, when the root of the problem exists outside of the child and in some other system surrounding the child. And so if we have to really, if we're looking at the goal of improving academic performance, we need to look at the family. We need to provide that that work in the schools, where we can also talk to teachers and administrators and see how the child is interacting in the school system. And that would give us more leverage with working with children. And so when you're thinking about corporal punishment, many times the behaviors that exist in the home that parents are trying to curb, some of those behaviors exist in the school. So it's likely that teachers are also experiencing that. And so that's a good way for school psychologists and other mental health professionals, school counselors, and so forth to really provide support for the use of SPFC in the schools. And so conjoined family counseling is really what I've been using. And it's really allowing family counseling within the school by looking at the whole family and treating them at the same time. It's collaborative. The process, if you go in community mental health, which I've had training in, it can be more elaborate. But in a school, we need fast working methods. Parents typically do not want to come to school for counseling for months and months of that. So 8 sessions, typically you'd want to do max, I would say, less is better, and no more than 30 minutes. Parents are really busy. children, if you're taking them out during class time, that's critical time that is being lost in this in instruction. So it needs to be really brief, and conjoined family therapy can provide that. And so the goal in conjoined family counseling is really to provide a consistent and stable environment for the child to thrive in. And so by doing that, the academic performance will improve. And so at Cal State LA, Dr. Carter and Dr. Hernandez, they have really been using conjoined family counseling in the clinic, working with students. And this is the process that they really follow when working with some of the minority populations there. And I'll just briefly go through it because I am going to apply it to my, my case study. But it begins with an initial referral. So that referral might come from various sources, and it requires you to gather information about the students. So one of the things that I do as a school psychologist is always go through, when I get a new case, I go through my CUME, the student's CUME, and I do just a CUME review. I talk to the people that I need to talk to get the information that I need to get. And in terms of getting the family into counseling, that might be hard sometimes working with immigrant populations, because there's so many things, stigma attached to the process. So that might require you to be really sensitive, and multiple attempts might be needed before you can actually get to the point where you convince the family to engage in the process. In the first meeting, you're learning about the strengths and weaknesses of the family as it surrounds the presenting problem. So whatever the concern is. And then there is you're also teaching communication skills, which is really, really key. One key thing when you're thinking about the parent-child relationship and helping with that corporal punishment piece. Getting both the parents to be able to understand the child and the child to be able to communicate what they're feeling, and allowing them to be able to listen to each other. Then the psychoeducation piece is really the biggest piece here for me. And that's the SBFC practitioners' attempt to really share alternative practices with the parents that they can use instead of corporal punishment. And then you engage the family, entire family, in co-constructing rules and expectations and consequences for behavioral infractions. Then the fourth and fifth meeting is just checking on progress and terminating and so forth. So this is a case. Justin is this is an 8-year-old boy, third grade boy, who I was working with, who I worked with during my doctoral training, actually. And he had been referred to me because his mother was caught on camera administering corporal punishment with him in a store. And so someone called Child Protective Services, and as part of the treatment contract, both Justin and his parents needed to engage in counseling. And he was not removed from the home or anything like that. They did checks. And this mom, she genuinely wanted what was best for her child. And she was Jamaican. So they had Jamaican roots. Mom is Jamaican, and Justin second generation Caribbean immigrant. And so that was really something that mom had to work through, and we talk about that later on. But Justin was referred to counseling with his parents, and he was exhibiting similar behaviors with his that he was exhibiting with his parents. He was exhibiting that at school. So he was having difficulty with just compliance, just focusing in school, a lot of talking back to his parents, and not doing what they were asking him to do. So the defiance part was really there. So I carried out the steps for conjoined family counseling. In some ways a little bit looser. I'll share where I change it up a little bit. So in the information gathering stage, typically I would say that it's good to get as much information about the student that you're working with. Like, you want to make sure that you get their cultural background and know who you're working with. If you need to talk to other people about maybe if it's a different cultural background, the student is from a cultural background that you have not previously worked with, you might need to do some research into that. In my case, I come from the Caribbean and I'm very well, I traveled to Jamaica, family in Jamaica, so I was very much aware of the culture. But at the same time, I did need to suppress that idea that I know this family background. And so in the information gathering, I try not to gather too much about the background. I did it later on when we first met. So what I did look at primarily was just, I gathered information that he was a strong academic student, that he had declining grades, that some interventions were tried with him, changing seat placement. There was parent-teacher conferences, extra time on tests to complete work, behavior contracts. Those are the basic things, basic interventions that are given to most students who are having some minor behavior problems in the schools. And so he was given those interventions. And so he was from Jamaican heritage with two brothers and a grandmother who lived in the US, but they didn't have frequent contact with it because of the grandmother's work schedule. So in step 2 was initial contact, rapport building. I had to spend a lot of time building rapport with this mother. In fact, I did a home visit with her, and it was very interesting. Me being another Black woman, I think really helped her in some ways. But at the same time, there was still resistance because we're coming up with two culture clashes, right? We have the American system and we have the Caribbean way of disciplining. And a lot of Caribbean parents, they don't believe that they should be told otherwise, and they should be able to hang on to those basic parts of their child rearing practices. And so I talked a lot about the student strengths, Justin's strengths. I really played on that. And then over time with building, doing that home visit and building that relationship, mother was able to agree to the session. And we only did it with Justin and his parents. So in the first meeting, and I'm going to go through this really quickly, we share, the parents share their resistance for counseling and the distrust for child protective services. That was a major theme. The family members shared their stories. I really had to spend some time teaching the communication aspect, being able to listen. A lot of times children are talked over. Children are taught that you should be seen and not heard. So talking and saying something that could potentially hurt your parents, that was hard. And so I had to prep parents for that. And then they talked about, mom really talked about how her journey to the US has been and really how it has impacted the child rearing practices. And I empathized a lot with them. And that was very interesting to hear. In the second meeting, we continued to explore community. Yes.
Kezia, I'm sorry.
2
you
minutes.
have 5 minutes.
Okay, thanks.
5. Okay.
So we continue to explore the communication patterns and just making sure that they heard each other, the maladaptive behaviors that Justin engaged in, and more adaptive behaviors, the maladaptive behaviors that Justin engaged in, and how parents will maladaptively responding to it. And so we taught more positive approaches to that, such as boundary and limit setting, regulation of parent emotions, the role of natural consequences, and so forth. And then in the third meeting, just co-constructing rules. I think this was an important process for Justin. He really enjoyed being able to talk about what type of consequences he wanted, and parents were at first a little bit reluctant, but they were open to hearing about it. We were able to role play, and then they were able to try that at home, some of the things that we talked about at home. And so in the fourth meeting, we were able to do a progress check, and Justin reported feeling less angry. That's something that he talked about before that he used to experience. Parents reported not using physical discipline, and we talked about fun family games and parent-child date night. And so in the final meeting, we just continued to talk about alternative discipline practice, and Justin continued to report a better relationship with parents, and just talking about how those things can transfer to the school. And we continue to work on classroom supports for Justin in the schools. And so quickly with multicultural consideration, I would say when working with Caribbean immigrants, it should be a voluntary process. In this case, it was not, but I still made sure I went through the informed consent process, even in mandatory cases. Sensitivity when working with Caribbean immigrants, there are two different cultures at play here, so you really want to be sensitive. Awareness of the sociocultural factors that impinge on Caribbean immigrants and their perspectives. Recognizing that there's systemic inequalities. So if there's something in the school that's causing the child's behavior, you want to look at that before you explore other things that might be a problem. And then barriers include the mistrust of government systems, stigma attached to mental health services, and lack of trained mental health professionals. And this is my final thoughts. The last slide is that SBFC is one of the many tools that can be used to intervene with students in the school. But there are a host of other things. As a school psychologist, there are assessments and all of these other things that need to be done and that can be done at some point. But I think this is one of the best first tools that you can use before getting to that point. And then including the family in the process. Like I talked about, individual counseling is the first go-to method, but including the family in that process. And then one thing that I'd love to see is just the systematic data collection to really help support the use of SBFC in the schools by many practitioners. So that's it for my presentation. And if you have questions, I'm happy to hear them.
Thank you, Kezia. Thank you very, very much. Yeah, there is a lot of question here. It was very interesting. So I can see Brian and Michael and Helen's song. Helen, okay, so Brian, yes, please. No,
Brian, can you unmute?
Raise his hand.
Thank you. Thank you, Sheena. What could I do? Thank you, Kezia, for this very interesting presentation. You mentioned earlier that school psychologists are not traditionally trained in family therapy. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about challenges in dealing with mental health professionals who don't have that training and who maybe are oppositional, and what you have encountered in sort of dealing with that, and what your thoughts are about how to overcome that kind of what Marcel Soriano calls a silo approach to mental health.
Yeah, I think just getting more data out there from a school psychologist's perspective. So I should be one of them, putting more stuff out there. And then being able to present at conferences and all of that, just being able to normalize school psychologists' engagement in it. But I think one of the main concerns with school psychologists is that we are bogged down with assessments. Our role is typically seen as the assessor. And so if we can change that, get more time, we have, the ratio is supposed to be 1 to like 500 students. We're at 1 to 1,500 to 3,000 students. So doing family counseling, it's not something that we do in the schools typically. We outsource those services. So I think that's one of the major things that needs to happen, just changing our workload, but also getting more data out there for school psychologists.
Thank you, Kezia.
Welcome.
Thank you. And we are, we are back to the lecture of Tzipora Shechtman talking about parenting group. So then you can get for more parents.
Right,
if you,
right.
You do. Yeah, thank you. And Helen, please.
My turn? Am I talking now?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes.
Kezia, I feel like I identify with you so much because my background is school psychology. I've worked in the system for 30 years now, and my emphasis is about cultural influence and emotional intelligence, which you're talking about cultural influence on how corporal punishment is interpreted, and what you're doing in the schools and really working with families. That's the motivation and the goal. And I feel like we need to connect, but I really appreciate the fact that, you're taking the time to do it as a school psychologist, because as you said, so much is about assessment, so much about is special education. And our role is to do more prevention as well, but we're not given time to do the prevention work, right? And so, so what I'm doing now is before the school starts, I'm doing the first 2 weeks with parent education. Nice. And, the way, when I talk to parents, corporal punishment and the negative way of interacting with kids is something that they're so familiar with, even though, they might minimize, the punishment or negative, but, they yell and they, get emotional, and the negative interaction happens. And it's coming from their cultural upbringing, right? It's coming from their experiences, and they don't realize that. And so to educate and to work with, in large and small group alike, I kind of feel like, that is our role, but it's really hard to break through that barrier. And I feel like you're doing that, and we need to connect. Really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Helen.
Yeah.
Thank you, Helen. And Michael, you want to ask something?
Yes. Thank you, Nuri. Dr. Gopaul-Knights, what a thrill to meet you. I can't wait to talk to you some more. I want to hear more about how you're doing the conjoint therapy work. That is, to me, the ultimate way that we bring school-based family counseling into schools. If we're going to engage families in direct work with their kids. And I really appreciate, I know that's been talked about in other parts of the symposium over the years, but I really love the way you crystallized it, brought it together. Something else that I think is really important that you were mindful of and modeled to us is how even people that are in group have to watch how they talk to people that are of the same group when we talk about these issues, right? And I'm actually thinking a lot about that issue in relation to some training I'll be doing for my students when they come back around cultural humility and how to be really mindful of that. So I appreciate you bringing that to us today too. Just a quick question I have is, what do you see as the most common kind of, to use a behaviorist language for a minute, what are the most common replacement behaviors you're seeing in the families you've worked with when they stop doing corporal punishment?
Kellen mentioned this, it's just the yelling, the screaming, it's still negative. So even, are you talking about positive behaviors or just like?
Yeah, I meant if they stop spanking their kids or giving their kid other corporal punishment, what do they most commonly replace it with that's positive?
So I've been talking, I can go on and on about this, but positive behaviors really is just stopping, listening to your child. Let me just talk from a personal point of view really quickly. It's just that my son, I have a 4-year-old, and he's a lot sometimes. And so what I do with him is just that from the time he wakes up in the morning, like I say, hey man, I am so excited to see you. Like, I'm so happy that you're here today. Let's talk about something that we can do today that's really fun. So I think just, being able to enhance the relationship between the child and the parent so that they can hear each other, helping the parent be able to stop and calm down and think before engaging in fun activities, really, but also boundary setting, limit setting. Those don't go away. It's not like we're going to say, oh, it's a free for all and you can do whatever you want. Still teaching the boundary setting, still teaching that rules are important and you need to follow it. You might have to engage in consequences and punishment-based measures, but those should be used really sparingly. So there's a whole toolkit that can be engaged with. That's it in a nutshell.
Thank you. Thank you. Look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you. Is there any more questions? Okay. Sibnat, it's already midnight in India and you wait for this lecture. Please, you can summarize. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Nurit, for giving me the opportunity to summarize the presentation made by Kezia Gopaul-Knights. At the outset, I would say that I greatly enjoyed your deliberation, your ideas, and your interest on the subject. Corporal punishment is a global challenge. Corporal punishment did not spare children from any part of the world, whether it's a developed country, developing countries, children from poor family, rich family, middle class family. It touched each and every child in different form, perhaps. Now, as you rightly mentioned, that based on literature review, that only 33 countries legally banned the corporal punishment. I think number is a little more. And Sweden is the first country who banned the corporal punishment. And they came out with a statement that stop corporal punishment. The slogan, which was globally very famous. In India, the situation is similar to your country or other part of the world because it's a culturally accepted behavior. It's a culturally permissible behavior by elderly people. Because elderly people has a common notion to have control over children, enforcing corporal punishment. So the children develop a fear. They listen to what parents say always, all the time. We are not ready to listen to them, give them a space to express their happiness or anything. So it's a cultural practice, and intergenerational transmission of maltreatment is found to have a high correlation with corporal punishment among young parents. Now, you rightly mentioned the adverse effect of corporal punishment in terms of internalizing behavior, externalizing behavior. And literature also strongly support what you said. Also, you narrated that corporal punishment gives a very positive, quick result. The moment I take an antibiotics, I get immediate result that I come out of the physical pain of any health problem. But in turn, it really affects the quality parental relationship that you nicely narrated. You also presented a very good case study of Justin. And there are hundreds and hundreds of children like Justin. They experience, I would say, that discomfortable family environment because of various reasons. Parents are unable to pay quality time. They're unable to listen to them. They're unable to play with their children. And that causes a lot of feeling of insecurity. And also out of that reason, perhaps, feeling of neglect, sometimes children behave in a different manner, just to draw attention. And like Justin, there are a lot of children across the society, they experience similar problem. Dealing with a case like Justin as a school counselor is a big challenge because non-cooperation from parents, mistrust on school-based family counseling or child protection services is a common phenomena. Because people have a notion that I understand everything. I know how to deal with my children, how to discipline them. So who are you to teach me about disciplining method? People are not ready to accept the positive behavior based on research evidence. So that happens because of educational background, that it happens because of cultural background, that happens because of mindset of different people, elderly people. That requires sensitization, that requires education for parents. From your presentation, it appeared to me that you are talking about only corporal punishment experienced by children at family level, but it also equally present or exist in the school education system also, in the hand of teachers and other staff. Perhaps you did not bring that issue, you mainly focused on corporal punishment experienced by the children at the family level. But corporal punishment of children in the school is a common phenomenon in India. I do not know what is the situation in Caribbean countries or in some other part, but in school it exists a lot because teachers, they are little intolerant, they're impatient. Sometimes in order to manage the classroom, they apply corporal punishment to create a fear so that all the children remain silent in the classroom. I think that is the wrong notion. Children might make a noise, they might talk among themselves. It's a common childhood behavior. We need to deal with them in a different positive reinforcement approaches, appreciating children, engaging them in group activities. So very nicely, you've narrated the positive side of conjoined family counseling, various steps you explained. And also you shared, finally, although initially there was a reluctance by the family members to cooperate with you, but at the end of the day, after making so much of effort, we found some positive result that they also started realizing that it is important to strengthen parental relationship, because ultimately it is our child and we need to look after the child, and that translated in positive communication between parent-child. I highly appreciate your initiative applying a conjoined family therapy from the school side in order to address the issue very systematically. And also you narrated that you rightly pointed out the workload for a school counselor. The situation is similar to India also. Most of the school appointed one or two counselors for addressing various challenges of few thousand students, which is practically impossible. A good number of my students, they're working in different schools, they're appointed as a school counselor, but finally they get engaged in some other official clerical job. They're unable to deal with those issues. But in order to attract more students in the school, when the school make an announcement for admission of the student in their prospectus or brochure, they mention the school has a mental health professionals for addressing students' issue. But in reality, they hardly pay attention and give importance to addressing parents' issue, children issue, even teacher unruly behavior with the students. So that really requires administrative reforms in order to bring in a policy to make educational administrator a situation that you have to recruit proportionate number of trained counselors, but that is also a challenge because we do not have so much of trained counselor across the society in order to address this sort of issue. So overall, it was a wonderful presentation. We all greatly enjoyed it, and it requires more involvement of professional psychologists in order to help the children, because children are voiceless. They experience corporal punishment, humiliation, mental harassment in the hand of biological parents or teachers, even the service provided at the school. But those problems go unnoticed because we hardly pay attention individually whether a child is facing any problem, but it requires collective effort by all of us. So once again, I thank all of you for sharing your wonderful experience and making all of us aware of this issue, that this is an important issue which requires attention by all professional psychologists. Thank you. And also I thank the organizer for giving me the opportunity to say a few words about your presentation. Thank you.